Welcome back to the next part of the Flutter pipeline series. In the previous video, we set up the basic pipeline, briefly touching triggers, virtual machine options, the variable groups that at our disposal, and ran a basic script. We also cloned a repository and added a sample Flutter app to that. So in this video, I want to extend on that and add in a Android build script where we will run an Azure DevOps job, which will install Flutter, build our Android app, assign it, and then publish its AAB artifact to the pipelines artifacts so that we can later consume that in our release pipeline. So before we get started, I just want to quickly talk about what we're trying to achieve here. So we've set up a trigger last time that every time we push code to our production branch, it will automatically kick off our pipeline, and we want to now set up this job. It is going to run in an Ubuntu environment. You can also use Mac OS if that's your preference. I'll show you how to set up a template that we can then reuse some of these steps when we do our iOS build, which will be to install Flutter, run Flutter Doctor to make sure that the environment is correct or help us diagnose any issues in the future. Then we'll run a pub-get to pull in required packages, and we'll import our key store and key properties files so that we can sign our Android app. And then finally, we'll do our Flutter build and lastly publish the artifact. So Azure works with a tiered system where your pipeline can have multiple stages, and each stage can contain multiple jobs, and each job can contain multiple steps. So your stages are essentially just a way of grouping jobs and setting up a sequence of events. So what we'll eventually get to is setting up a setup stage that has a setup job to run unit tests, set pipeline versions, and so on. And then our build stage will depend on the success of the setup stage. So if our unit test fails, then the entire pipeline will stop there. Otherwise, our build stage will kick off, executing our Android job and iOS job. We don't have to set up a dependency here. I just want to show you how that works so that if you do want one job to run after the other, it can. But if you do have something like parallel pipelines, you probably don't want that dependency because then these jobs can run in parallel. One important thing to note about the Azure jobs is that each job spins up a new virtual environment. So if you want to pass information from one job to another, you'll have to do that through the pipeline variables. So coming back to our script in the online editor, we currently don't have a lot going on here, so just two basic scripts running, printing out some values. Azure DevOps has a handy assistant that you can expand here from the right-hand side, which gives you all possible tasks that you can add to your pipeline script. It then allows you to enter the parameters there and generates the code for you. But currently, by default, there isn't anything for Flutter. So you could either add a lot of these script tasks and basically do exactly what you would have done in a command line to build your Flutter app, where you do a Flutter pub get and a Flutter build app bundle for your Android app and so on. However, there is an easier way. Someone made a nice extension for DevOps in the marketplace that is free, called Flutter Tasks. I'll leave the link in the description below. So if you click on the Get Free, it will install it into your DevOps environment. So if you come back here after you've installed it and you search for Flutter here on the right-hand panel, it will give you all the possible Flutter tasks that came with that extension. And I've been using this for quite some time and it works really nicely. And it seems to be quite well supported. If you look at their GitHub page, there's quite a few contributors and they do make constant updates. So where it makes sense, I'll show you the equivalent command line script task of these tasks so that in case you do want to make sure that you don't rely on this extension, but I won't do it for all of them, just to kind of give you the options. So you'll notice this online editor is not that easy to work in. It sometimes forces the autocomplete on things that you don't want, and it can be a bit frustrating to work with. So I prefer to use VSCode, and they have a specific extension that you can install that helps setting up pipelines. So if you go to the extensions tab and you search for Azure Pipelines, you can install this extension. It is made by Microsoft. So to enable the extension on a script, you'll have to come down here where it says the selected language mode is YAML, and then just select the Azure Pipelines here from the top, which will then change it into this rocket icon. And what this gives you is some linting and error checking. So if you have the wrong indentation, it will highlight it for you and tell you what's wrong. And you can hover over things. It'll give you tooltips, or you can do a control space to see what other options are available for a specific task. So quite a handy tool to have in your VS Code to help you write your pipeline scripts. So the first thing that we want to do is install Flutter. I'm going to use the online editor to generate the tasks code and then bring it over to VS Code. So we can add the Flutter install task, and here you can see some parameters that we can choose from. So I want the stable branches latest version. You can also specify a specific custom version. So this is something you can maybe also add into your variables that you can pull in here. So if your variable is called maybe Flutter version, then you can dynamically change that in your library without updating your script. But for this video, I'm just going to choose the latest stable Flutter version. So I'm going to add that script, and this will install Flutter for us because it is not installed by default on the Azure virtual machines. So you have to explicitly install it. So I'm going to bring that over to my script. I'm going to replace these other scripts that we had that just printed out some hello world content. The @0 basically just refers to the version of this task. So every time a third party or Microsoft or whoever made the task creates breaking changes to their interface of the task, they will change this version so that if you are still targeting an older version, then your build script won't break. Great, so that will install Flutter for us on our virtual machine. Next, we want to do a Flutter doctor just to make sure everything is fine. So you could use the Flutter command task and in the arguments just do a doctor and a -v for verbose so that we get as much information as possible. So that's the one option. Alternatively, you can just do this with the script since we now have Flutter installed on this virtual machine. So you can just do script and then just write exactly what you would in a command line. So Flutter doctor -v. So I feel this is a bit shorter, so I prefer these type of one-line scripts to rather use this than specifically the Flutter command, but that's up to you. I'm going to rather use Flutter doctor -v and bring this over. And then we want to do a Flutter pub get. I'm just going to paste another one here, Flutter pub get, which will get our packages for us. So a handy thing to get into the habit of is adding display names for your tasks. So you can do that by adding the display name property. And then this will just label each step in your build pipeline as it's executing. Otherwise, might just say something like script, and then you'd have no idea what's actually happening here while your pipeline is executing. So it just gives you a bit of a better overview of what's happening. I'm just going to say install Flutter, and I'm going to add one here as well. You have to do it kind of afterwards because this indicates that this is a multi-line script. So I'm just going to edit it down here. Display name, run Flutter doctor, and then one for my last script. Great, we can save that and we can push this now to our production branch, which will kick off an automatic build since we set the trigger to production. Great, so now that we've pushed those changes right to our production branch, it automatically kicked off a build for us. And we can see it's executing a job here. So you'll notice we have a job even though we didn't mention any job in our script. So by default, if you just start adding steps, it creates a generic job called job for you that contains all of our steps. So here it is, installing Flutter. Great. Our pipeline completed in about 1 minute 55 seconds. The longest step was about just to install Flutter, which is about 1 minute 23 seconds. But that's okay in the big scheme of things. And so we ran Flutter Doctor. Everything looks good. So you'll see it says Android SDK file not found for ADB, but that's fine. We don't need ADB. We just want to build with our Android SDK. And we did a Flutter pub get. It got all the packages that we needed. And again, it just did the post job for our repo that we checked out to clean that again. All right, great. So this is going pretty good so far. So we can go back to the online editor. So we can use the assistant over here. And if we just search for Flutter again. So next we want to do a build task. So we can actually build our Android AAB. So in the target platform, I'm just going to choose Android AAB, and I'm going to leave the path to the project as dot, since we're already in the root of our Flutter project. And here's some other options that we're later going to have a look at, such as setting our build number and version number while it's building the app for us, so that we can automatically version it and increment the versions as we're doing releases. So I'm going to add the Flutter build task as is. So that's pretty basic. The equivalent script variant of this would be something like Flutter build app bundle. And if I recall correctly, that automatically targets release mode, or you can just do a -- release to be safe. So yeah, it's also pretty basic, but we will be extending it later with the versions. You can still also, with the script variant of this, you can also do like a -- build name and specify the version here, like 1.0.1 or whatever. And then you can also have the -- build number, which is the version code, which I will explain a bit better in the versioning video on how to configure all of that. So yeah, it's up to you to decide whether you want to use the Flutter build or the script variant of this. I'm going to use the Flutter build because I like it explicitly specifying each property underneath each other, especially as it will grow later on, but that is up to you. Okay, and then we can also just add a display name over here. So we can push that to our production branch and it will automatically kick off a build again. So we can see it kicked off a new build. We can go into that so we can see it in executing our pipeline live. So we can see the build failed. So let's go into it and see what went wrong. So there's literally a message that says what went wrong. And it says here that it requires Java 17 to run, and we're currently using Java 11. So that's quite interesting. So let's have a look what the virtual machine comes pre-installed with. So if we go back to our script, there's that link at the top that takes us to the Microsoft Docs. And if we go to pool and hosted images, and we are currently running Ubuntu latest, which is Ubuntu 22.04, and there's a link for the included software here. So we can go to that, which takes us to the GitHub README, and there's a very long list of all sorts of software that comes pre-installed when you spin up one of these virtual machines. So if we go down a bit, we'll see Java over here, and you can see it is by default pointing to Java 11, but we do have Java 17 and Java 21 already installed on this virtual machine. So it's just targeting the incorrect Java version. So it asks us to instead target Java 17. So fortunately, there is a task that we can use to change our Java target, which is called Java Tool Installer, and just put an @ at the end. If you Google that, it usually takes you to the task. And here we can see there are two versions of this task, 0 and 1. So they've clearly made some breaking changes. So let's just use the latest version of the task. So essentially what we'll need is, so this is a required field, the architecture, and this field is also required. And we know it is pre-installed, so we'll choose the pre-installed option. So let's copy everything up until here. The rest are just optional parameters, and let's bring that to our script. So I want to do that before we do our Flutter build. So we rather want to target Java 17. It is a 64 architecture, and we want to choose the pre-installed option because we know it exists on this virtual machine. Let me just remove all these comments. Let's commit and push that to our production branch. Great, the job completed successfully. And if we go to the Build Flutter Android app task, we can see here where it generated our AAB for us. It's in the build app outputs bundle release app release.aab location. What we want to do is take this AAB and publish it to the pipeline's artifacts so that it's kept in a secure location until our release pipeline is ready to take that and push it to the Google Play Store. So what we can use to copy the AAB first to our artifact staging directory is a task called copy files. And we can see version 2 is the latest version. And you can specify a optional source folder. You can specify which contents you want to copy and a target folder. So I'm going to take all of this and bring it over to our script. So what we want to copy is a specific file. So I'm going to remove the source folder parameter entirely. And this contents parameter can take wildcard characters, which are these stars. So the file that we want to copy is called app-release.aab. So I'm just going to copy the file's name and paste it in here. And then we can proceed this with a */ So this basically just tells it needs to search recursively through the whole directory that we're in until it finds the file app-release.aab. And the target folder that we want to copy that to is a Azure pipeline variable called artifact staging directory. So if we search for that, build.artifact, and we go to the predefined variables in the Microsoft Docs, and here we can see a description on this. So it's essentially a directory that we can place files that we want to publish. So I'm going to copy this entire variable and bring that over to our script. So the way we reference the variables is with the $sign. You can put it in brackets. And then lastly, I just want to add one optional parameter here, which is flatten folders. Otherwise, it might keep the folder structure where it finds this AAB, that long path, and just copy that whole folder structure over to our artifact staging directory. So I just want to set this to true so that it flattens the folder and just basically copies the file to our artifact staging directory. And then finally, we can do a publish build artifacts task, which will publish it to the pipeline's artifacts. And this is what it looks like. So I'm just going to copy up until there. So as you can see, it already points to the build artifact staging directory as the path to publish, which should already contain our AAB. And then it asks for the artifact name. And this is basically a folder that it will create in our pipeline artifacts. So I prefer not to just use the word drop. So I'm just going to call this one Android, since we'll also have one for iOS, and it will just keep it nice and separate. Great, we can commit and push all of these changes onto our production branch. Great, our pipeline finished successfully, and it copied our file and published it for us. So if we go back and in the related section, you'll see one published. If we go in there, we can see the Android folder that we specified and the AAB is inside that. So well done for getting to this point. This AAB is currently not signed yet, so in the next video we'll look at signing this AAB. Don't want this video to carry on too long. So see you next time, where we'll be discussing signing, and after that we'll dive into our iOS builds. See you next time.